I'd like to show you a tremendous game from the match between Giri and Vasil Ivanchuk, played in the Chess Legends online tournament. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting us on Patreon or PayPal, links down there. So what a clash of styles. We have Vasil Ivanchuk, really creative in all phases of the game, playing against, well, the rock of responsibility that's Giri. Giri was already 1 up in this match. This is game 3. So could Ivanchuk stir things up? So we have Giri with the white pieces. Ivanchuk has played a kind of Queen's Indian as black. He hasn't committed the e-pawn yet, which is a little bit different. And here, of course, e6 is just a normal Queen's Indian. But instead, Ivanchuk plays c5. So this has more of a Benoni type feel to it. And Giri plays d5, which looks correct to block in that bishop. And now Ivanchuk turns it into a kind of Benko. Really interesting move. Of course, if this is taken, then black will be able to grab a centre pawn, which looks pretty healthy. So Giri played b3. And then g6. So this is a very strange mix of a sort of Benoni, a Benko, and a kind of King's Indian as well. But it feels like this one has turned out pretty well for Ivanchuk. And the reason I say that is because of this Queen's knight. Now, if the knight comes out here, then it can already be driven away with b4. So Giri decides to put the knight on d2, but this is not the best place for that knight. It can get rather caught up there, as we'll see. Rook e8 from Ivanchuk. Very interesting. So preparing perhaps e6. Now e6 just holds that pawn on b5. Rook e1, knight d7. So sound development so far. e4, and yes, Ivanchuk plays e6 because he's not getting very far on the queen side. So in this way he's countering in the centre. And here, well, quite quickly Giri exchanged on e6. But I think it would have been better for white to clear up the queen side, play a4 here, for example. Now, if black captures on either of these pawns, then positionally that doesn't look great. So I think black should close the queen side, but then let's just play the rook into the middle and await to see how black commits. But Giri exchanged on e6 and then rook takes. And this pawn is now the target. You can see black's pieces are lined up very well. As I mentioned before, I think this knight is a problem. It really needs to be on c3 in this kind of position, covering the d5 square. I mean, the reason, as I explained, the reasons why it couldn't go there. But on d2, it's not on a great square. It simply doesn't have anywhere to go to. And it rather gets in the way of the rest of white's pieces. Now, it could try and sort of bounce around via f1, but at the moment, that's really tricky because of the pressure on this pawn. So I think Giri's next move was understandable. Knight g5. Attacking the rook. Rook comes back to e7. Rook a d1. Queen c7 from Ivanchuk, and that's preparing the queen's rook's entry into the game. And now knight h3. So this is Giri's idea. This knight comes around from f3 where it wasn't doing too much and can come into f4 where it looks at d5. And if necessary later on, you can play f3 to cover the e-pawn. So rook a e8. So now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces all looking at that e pawn. And even if white were to play f3 here, then knight h5, and this prepares f5. And really, black's pieces are so well coordinated here. So let's come back. So rook a8 just been played. Knight f4. And now bishop h6. So this could be potentially a little bit awkward for white. So queen c3. There's a problem, of course. If this bishop is given up, then the queen and bishop look very dangerous on this diagonal. So b4 pushes the queen away, looks logical. Queen d3. And again, well, it is possible to take here. Obviously, the queen can't reach the long diagonal via c3 and d4. Nevertheless, that bishop is very dangerous, and, well, who knows, the queen could sweep across the board. So Ivanchuk decided not to exchange on f4 and just drop the bishop back. But it wasn't bad for him to have actually included the pawn move b4. These pawns take away really important squares from white's pieces. And now Giri plays f3. I mean, I think this is basically quite a difficult position for white, because it's really hard to get to find a clear plan. Now, having said that, if we could sort of drive away that knight from f6, but that involves advancing the g-pawn, and that could compromise white's position. So it's not easy to be really active with white here. Knight e5 from Ivanchuk hits the queen, which dropped back to c2, and now Ivanchuk really takes the initiative. g5. Knight comes back to d3. Knight c6, that's interesting. So it's spinning around and perhaps looking to get into d4. And here, queen c1 looks sensible, just to look at that pawn on g5. Nothing is clear yet. Black has some initiative, but still has to make the breakthrough. But knight f1 was played instead, understandably trying to maneuver that knight to a better square. Of course, if you could come to f5, that would be wonderful. But now knight d4 from Ivanchuk. Now, if that's taken, then with that dark squared bishop gone, then potentially these squares in white's camp are very weak. And g4 is on the cards as well. Even moves like d5, exploiting these pins, might be possible at some stage if white isn't careful. But yeah, g4 looks like the move. So exchanging off bishop for knight certainly doesn't solve white's problems. Queen f2 played, and now g4. So this is looking pretty serious now, with the guard for the e-pawn being undermined. Giri exchanges off the knight, too dangerous for him, and the knight comes back to d2 to try and lend some support to the pawn on e4. a5, very steady, just protecting that b-pawn. And of course, if this is taken, then, well, that means, apart from the fact this is weak, but in this case, in fact, that knight could spin round and land on e3. And you can see once that dark squared bishop goes, if black can play a piece into that e3 square, it would be pretty good. So rook e2 played. Ivanchuk exchanged on f3. And then played the bishop back to c8. So this is interesting. He didn't exchange, he didn't take the pawn on e4, but instead redeployed this bishop to this diagonal, looking at these squares. Knight f4. In fact, knight g4 is possible for black here, but queen c5 holds on to the d-pawn. Rook f1, so Giri trying to get something to work on the f-file perhaps, but bishop h6, so you can see if that knight were to move away, that bishop could land on that beautiful square e3, so king h1 is very understandable, putting the king on a light square. King h8, Ivanchuk follows suit in wanting a little bit of security. Knight d3 attacks the queen, which came back to a7. Knight f4 came back again. Giri would like a draw in this position, I can tell you. He's under pressure. But, of course, Ivanchuk plays on. Knight g4. Threatening the queen, and if that knight lands there, that's a disaster. So bishop takes knight, bishop takes bishop. And things are really going black's way. Bishop attacks the rook. I mean, maybe the best chance here is to play knight d5 just to give him some material, but I think it's basically already very, very good for black. Rook e1 played, and now Ivanchuk really goes for it. Using those rooks on the e-file, he plays f5, exploiting that pin. So the threat is simply to take here. So e takes f5, and now a really great move from Ivanchuk. If he takes on f5, then white exchanges rooks, and actually after queen f3, this isn't so clear. That queen can activate somewhere down this diagonal. It's really not clear. But after e takes f5, Ivanchuk played rook e3. Beautiful move, and this paralyzes white. You can see that that rook controls f3, so this knight can't move out. In fact, it's that knight on d2, which is really the problem for white in this position. And of course, rook takes rook allows pawn takes with a fork, winning material. So this is a wonderful move, and now Giri really is in massive trouble. f6 played. Well, he's looking to just stir things up, create some confusion with this pawn. Queen f7, excellent move, just cuts out any nonsense. Knight d5. Attacking the rook, but rook e2. All these pieces lined up beautifully. Attacking the queen. Rook takes rook. Rook takes rook. Queen takes d4. Well, already things are really bad. Now, rook takes knight would allow queen takes bishop, but bishop h3 hits the rook. The knight is also attacked. And this is a disaster. If rook d1, just bishop takes knight. And the back rank is weak. So after bishop h3, queen h4, bishop g2 check. And here, actually, queen a7 check is mate, basically on this diagonal. White can just interpose with a few pieces, but they just get taken. But instead, Ivanchuk played bishop takes knight. The hapless knight on d2 finally dropped. And of course, it's completely winning. Rook f2. The funny thing is, Ivanchuk now played queen f7. So he saw the move one move too late, but anyway, who cares? He's completely winning. g4 protects that, but bishop takes knight, and that was the final move of the game. Of course, it's completely winning for black. After pawn takes, well, you can choose how you want to finish this off, but rook takes rook. Queen takes and bishop e3, winning the queen certainly isn't a bad option for black. I just really loved the way Ivanchuk played that. So creative in the opening. He often finds little ideas to shake up his opponent, and I think he really wrong-footed Giri here. And yeah, I think Giri was outplayed strategically, actually. Wonderful game. Magnus Carlsen played another extraordinary match against Jan Nepomniachtchi and won that. There was some real adventures in that, but frankly, I thought it was more interesting to look at Ivanchuk's game today. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching.